Becoming a parent changes everything. The moment Emily and Mark held their baby girl, Sophie, for the first time, their world shifted. She was small, delicate, and perfect. They moved into a charming old house in upstate New York, a quiet neighborhood, a spacious backyard, and a nursery with a beautiful antique crib they had found at an estate sale. The crib was a handcrafted wooden piece, elegant but sturdy, with intricate carvings along the sides. Emily loved how it looked in Sophie's room. It was the perfect centerpiece. But from the moment they brought it home, something about it felt off. At night, Emily would wake up with an inexplicable sense of unease. Sometimes she swore she heard soft rustling noises through the baby monitor, like tiny fingers running along the wooden bars of the crib. Mark brushed it off, saying it was just Sophie moving in her sleep. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling. Then one night, the baby monitor picked up something strange. Emily had just put Sophie to sleep. As always, she kept the monitor on her nightstand, glancing at the screen every so often. The nursery's soft nightlight cast a gentle glow over Sophie's crib. She was sound asleep, curled up with her little stuffed bunny. Emily sighed in relief and closed her eyes. A thump. Emily's eyes snapped open. The sound had come from the monitor. She grabbed her phone and looked at the screen. Sophie hadn't moved, but something had. Her breath caught in her throat. There, in the dim light, just beneath the crib's railing, she saw them. Two tiny hands gripping the wooden bars from the inside. Her stomach dropped. Sophie's hands were tucked under her blanket. These weren't hers. Emily's heart pounded against her ribs. She stared at the screen, willing the image to change, praying it was a glitch. But the hands didn't disappear. Instead, they moved, fingers curling, slowly tapping against the wood. Emily bolted upright, shaking Mark awake. "Mark! Look at the monitor!" she whispered frantically, shoving the phone in his face. He groggily sat up, rubbing his eyes. What am I looking at?" "The crib," Emily gasped. "There are—" But when she turned back to the screen, the hands were gone. Sophie stirred slightly, but nothing else seemed out of place. Mark frowned. "Em, you need to sleep. You're seeing things." But she wasn't. She knew what she had seen. The next morning, Emily couldn't stop staring at the crib. Running her fingers over the carved wood, she shivered. There were tiny scratch marks along the inside of the railing, claw-like etchings, as if small fingers had dragged along the surface over and over again. That night, she set up the monitor to record. At exactly 3:12 a.m., she woke up with a feeling of sheer terror, not because of a sound but because of a presence. Her body felt paralyzed with fear before she even reached for her phone. She hesitated, her fingers trembling as she played the recorded footage. The video showed Sophie sleeping peacefully. But then, at 3:09 a.m., the crib shook slightly. At 3:10 a.m., movement in the shadows. At 3:11 a.m., something small crawled up from beneath the crib. At 3:12 a.m., tiny fingers gripped the wooden bars. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she watched the footage. The hands, pale, thin, too small to belong to any normal child, reached up, pressing against the railing as if something were trying to pull itself up. But the most horrifying part? At 3:13 a.m., Sophie began to stir. And as she moved, the hands suddenly vanished, as if they had slipped back into the crib's base. Emily dropped her phone. A cold shudder ran through her. She had to get rid of the crib. The next morning, she told Mark everything. He was skeptical, but agreed to move Sophie to a bassinet. They placed the crib in the garage, covering it with a tarp. That night, Emily finally felt like she could breathe, until the scratching started. A faint, rhythmic scraping sound echoed from the baby monitor. Emily froze. The camera was still facing the nursery, where the crib no longer was. The sound was coming from inside the room. Then, through the monitor, she saw it. The closet door in Sophie's nursery, slowly creaking open. A shadow moved inside, Something was still there. Emily raced to Sophie's room, flipping the lights on. The closet stood slightly ajar. Her breath caught as she stepped forward, her fingers trembling as she reached for the door handle. She yanked it open. Nothing. Just baby clothes, storage bins, a few stuffed animals. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something on the floor. A small handprint, pressed into the carpet. That was the last night they spent in the house. The next day, Mark arranged for the crib to be taken away. They gave it to a local antique dealer, never telling him why. They moved within a month, unable to shake the feeling that whatever had been in that crib had been watching Sophie. Months later, Emily's curiosity got the best of her. She searched online for the history of the antique crib. What she found made her stomach churn. The crib had belonged to a little boy in the 1940s, a boy who had died in his sleep. The parents, devastated, had passed the crib down through generations, but every family that owned it reported the same thing. Scratching sounds, small handprints, whispered giggles at night. And the worst part? The dealer they sold it to had resold it. Emily never found out who bought it, but sometimes in the dead of night she still dreams of little hands gripping the wooden bars of an old crib. And in those dreams, the tapping never stops. When Lauren and Mike bought their new house, they thought they had found the perfect home. It was a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where kids rode their bikes down tree-lined streets and neighbors waved from their porches. The house itself was old but charming, with hardwood floors, a fireplace, and a nursery for their 6-month-old son, Noah. From the very first night, something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just small things. Doors left slightly open when they swore they had closed them. A faint creaking in the walls at night, an uneasy feeling in the nursery. Lauren dismissed it as nerves. Moving into a new home always took some getting used to. Then Noah started waking up at exactly 2:37 a.m. every night. At first it seemed normal. Babies woke up often. But what disturbed Lauren was how he woke up. Not crying, not fussy, just staring at the closet. His tiny hands gripping the crib rails, his wide eyes locked on the closet door. One night, curiosity got the best of her. She stayed up late, watching the baby monitor. Noah slept soundly, his chest rising and falling with each breath. The nursery was dimly lit by his nightlight. The closet door was shut. Everything was still. Then, at 2:36 a.m., the baby monitor screen glitched. Just for a second. A flicker. A brief, static hum. At 2:37 a.m., Noah sat up. His tiny hands curled around the crib rails. He turned his head, staring at the closet. Lauren's breath caught in her throat. The closet door was open. Not wide, just a crack, enough to see the darkness beyond. A chill crawled down Lauren's spine. Had they forgotten to close it? Had the air conditioning caused it to shift? She swallowed hard, staring at the screen. Then from the baby monitor's speakers, she heard it. A whisper. Not Noah. Not the sound of the house settling. A voice. Low. Raspy. Female. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the unmistakable rhythm of someone speaking inside the nursery. Lauren bolted out of bed. She barely registered Mike stirring beside her as she ran down the hall. Her fingers fumbled on the nursery doorknob, her heart hammering. She pushed the door open, flipping on the light. Noah sat in his crib, blinking up at her. The closet door was wide open. Lauren's breath came in short gasps as she stepped forward. She grabbed Noah, holding him close, her eyes locked on the empty closet. Nothing was inside, no strange figures, no shadows, just the same shelves and tiny baby clothes. But she knew it had been closed when they put him to bed. That night she refused to sleep. She kept the monitor beside her, the volume turned all the way up. And at 2:37 a.m., she heard it again, a slow creaking. A whisper, closer this time. And then, laughter. Not a child's giggle, something dry, hollow, wrong. She woke Mike, shaking him violently. "Something's in the house," she gasped. "I heard it. The closet door keeps opening by itself, and I swear to God, Mike, I heard a woman's voice." Mike sighed, groggy. "Lauren, it's an old house. Maybe the hinges are loose. Maybe the baby monitor is picking up a frequency from another house." Then they both heard it. A click. The sound of a door slowly unlatching. Lauren grabbed the monitor. The nursery's camera feed was static. Then, just for a second, the screen flickered back. And in that brief, chilling moment, Lauren saw her son, sitting up in his crib, staring at the tall, dark shape standing in the closet. A woman. Long, tangled black hair. A pale, sunken face. Lips curled into a grin that stretched too wide. Then, the feed cut out. Lauren screamed. She sprinted down the hallway, Mike right behind her. She didn't even hesitate. She kicked the nursery door open. The closet door was shut. Noah sat in his crib, blinking in confusion. Lauren's hands trembled as she reached for the closet door. Slowly, she pulled it open. The overhead light flickered for a brief second before settling. Nothing. Just a normal closet. But that didn't explain what they had seen. They didn't sleep that night. They didn't even try. The next morning, Lauren searched the history of the house. What she found made her stomach drop. Her name was Margaret Hale, a nanny hired by the first family who had ever lived in the house. But something had gone wrong. The article was vague, but Lauren pieced together what she could. Margaret had developed an obsession with the baby under her care. She had started whispering to him at night, telling him he didn't need his real mother, that she was his mother now. One night, the father had caught her standing over the crib, reaching for the child. He had locked her in the closet, waiting for the police, but by the time they arrived, Margaret was dead. They never figured out how. Her body had been found in the same closet, her fingernails worn down to the bone from scratching at the door. The family moved out, and over the decades, the house changed hands. But the disappearances continued. Lauren slammed the laptop shut. That night, she and Mike moved Noah's crib into their room. They locked the nursery door. And at 2:37 a.m. through the monitor, they heard the closet door creak open. A soft whisper, a woman's voice. He was supposed to be mine. They moved out 2 weeks later. The house sold within a month. And a few weeks after that, Lauren found a post on a local forum. Does anyone else have weird experiences with baby monitors? Ours keeps picking up something. A woman's voice. And every night at 2:37 a.m., the closet door opens on its own. Lauren shut her laptop and never looked back. Sarah and James had always dreamed of becoming parents. Their journey hadn't been easy. After years of trying, countless doctor visits, and a heartbreaking miscarriage, they finally welcomed their son, Oliver, into the world. He was perfect in every way, and they were determined to give him the safest, happiest life possible. They moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood, a house with a spacious nursery, and set up everything they thought they'd need: crib, soft night lights, stuffed animals, and most importantly, a baby monitor. It wasn't just any monitor. It had night vision, motion detection, and even a two-way microphone. Sarah liked knowing she could always watch over Oliver, even when she wasn't in the room. For the first few months, everything was normal. Oliver slept peacefully through most nights, only waking up occasionally to be fed. But one night, as Sarah lay in bed scrolling through her phone, she casually glanced at the baby monitor app. The screen displayed Oliver's crib, bathed in the soft glow of his nightlight. But something made her pause. In the far left corner of the screen, a shadow flickered. At first, she thought it was just the camera adjusting to the dim lighting. She tapped the screen, making sure the feed wasn't lagging. Oliver lay perfectly still, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. The shadow didn't move again. Sarah shook her head, blaming exhaustion, and locked her phone. The next night, it happened again. This time, the shadow moved. Sarah's breath hitched as she stared at the screen. It wasn't just a flicker. The dark figure shifted ever so slightly as if stepping forward. She turned to James, nudging him awake. "James, look at this," she whispered, holding out her phone. He groggily took it from her hands and squinted at the screen. "There's nothing there, Sarah," he mumbled, half asleep. "You're just tired." But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. A few nights later, James was working late, leaving Sarah alone in bed. As always, she checked the monitor before going to sleep. This time her stomach dropped. The shadow was standing beside Oliver's crib. Her breath came in short gasps as she watched the figure lean over Oliver's sleeping body. It didn't have a clear form, but she could see its silhouette, a tall, lanky shape with unnaturally long arms. It just stood there, hovering over her baby. Without thinking, she threw the covers off and sprinted down the hall, bursting into the nursery. The room was empty. Oliver lay peacefully in his crib, undisturbed. The closet door was slightly ajar, but nothing seemed out of place. Sarah swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the crib. She checked the monitor again. The shadow was still there, on the screen, but not in reality. She barely slept that night. For the next few days, she tried to convince herself it was a glitch. Maybe the camera was malfunctioning, or maybe she was just exhausted from months of sleepless nights. But then, the whispers started. One night, as she watched the monitor, a faint noise crackled through the speaker. She turned up the volume, listening intently. A soft whisper. She couldn't make out the words, but it was there. Low, breathy, almost like someone was speaking directly into the microphone. A chill crawled up her spine. She knew Oliver couldn't speak yet. And then, clear as day, she heard it. "Mommy." Sarah's blood ran cold. She sat up in bed, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. That wasn't Oliver's voice. It wasn't a baby's voice at all. It was deeper, raspier, like a child who had outgrown their infancy long ago. She stared at the monitor in horror. The shadow was back, but this time it was facing the camera. It was watching her. She grabbed Oliver from his crib and ran to the living room, refusing to go back to the nursery. When James got home, he found her curled up on the couch, clutching Oliver tightly. "What's wrong?" he asked, concerned. She shakily handed him the baby monitor. "Watch the playback," she whispered. James hesitated before opening the saved footage. His face was unreadable as he scrolled through the night's recording. And then he froze. His hand tightened around the phone, and his face turned pale. "Sarah," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell is that?" The footage showed Oliver stirring slightly in his crib. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the closet door creaked open, on its own. A tall, dark figure stepped out, unfolding itself with unnatural movements, its limbs too long, its posture hunched. It stood by Oliver's crib for several minutes, watching him sleep. But the most horrifying part? At the end of the recording, it turned to the camera and smiled. James slammed the phone down. "We're leaving. Tonight." They didn't pack. They didn't wait. They simply grabbed their baby and drove to a hotel. The house was put on the market the very next day. But even after moving into a new home, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them. She refused to use a baby monitor ever again. Months later, out of curiosity, she looked up their old address. The house had been sold to a young couple with a newborn daughter. And then, she found a forum post from the new mother. "Does anyone else have weird issues with their baby monitor? Ours keeps picking up something. A shadow standing over the crib. And last night, it whispered our daughter's name." Which part of this story creeped you out the most? Let me know in the comments if you're still watching.